What happens when a fan deviates from the fan base, like a salmon swimming upstream? No, that simile doesn't work. It is a simile, isn't it? Craig, is that a simile or a metaphor?
I am sure it is obvious, but I have no intention of actually giving him a battalion. I just need to keep stringing them along. What would I do if my juiciest fruit rolled away?
That's a metaphor. I never wanted to be known as possibly the most polarizing video game reviewer in the world. I'd much rather have been known for my collection of egg-chested skeletons. But it wasn't meant to be. The thing about being polarizing is that no matter how many people might like you, an equal or greater number of people think you're a tit. And when it comes to video game fandoms, there are a few in particular who have attributed more than a little tititude to yours truly. Nintendo fans in general and Zelda fans in particular. Myself and the Sonic fandom.
Oh no!
Dynasty Warriors is different. I was once so deep into the Dynasty Warriors fandom that I was an official moderator on the Tecmo Koei forums. I only remembered that like last week. Not that it's glamorous or interesting, it's just something that happened, you know. So anyway, here's my problem with Dynasty Warriors Origins. Or, to be more nuanced, because nuance is the name of the game today. Well, the name of the game is Dynasty Warriors Origins, but just shut up. We're going to be talking about prioritization and how that influences one's fandom. Yeah, that's a good cover story for what is essentially me talking about myself for half an hour.
Report from the spies! The main shoe force has definitely camped.
So, was the enemy camp pretty?
What? It was normal, I suppose.
Allow me to paint you a clear picture of the kind of Dynasty Warriors fan I am, as I feel this picture will help anybody questioning my opinion of the series' current status to understand where I'm coming from. Considering I've already been told to off myself as a result of my review of Dynasty Warriors Origins, I feel this understanding might be useful. When I first fell in love with Dynasty Warriors 3, I would rewatch every cutscene during every stage with every new character I unlocked. See, Dynasty Warriors 3 did something that the series has long since put an end to. Level cutscenes wouldn't just swap in character models depending on who you played. Each one had their own dialogue. These cutscenes would play out the same way every time, but the lines would be unique depending on who you were. To some of you that might not sound like much, and, well, a lot of the lines weren't even all that interesting, but when you consider there are 40 playable characters on the roster, you gotta acknowledge that all that extra voice recording for the sake of fluff is no small feat. It certainly added a good deal of extra personality and flavour, and exhibited the kind of care, effort, attention to detail, and sheer creative pride that a Megaforce used to, a long time ago, put into its flagship series. So, when Zhang Bao famously demanded,
"Feel the power of my magic!"
players would see said magic defied with a unique flourish by their chosen warrior when said magic was undone. For added comedy, said defiance of said magic could be exclaimed by Zhang Bao's own brother and fellow sorcerer Zhang Jiao, since you could play any unlocked character on any unlocked stage, including stages they're the enemy boss of.
I don't believe in magic.
Because of this, you could have the brilliant strategist Zhuge Liang get lost in the maze he designed, or Yuan Shao deciding he should set his own supply depot on fire.
There's the supply compound. How did they find it?
Oh yeah, I forgot that he became confused that the enemy found his supply depot when he found his supply depot because he was the enemy. Plus, the idea of Yuan Shao deciding anything on his own is pretty funny. Well, it is if you're a history nerd. A history nerd with a particularly mundane sense of humour. I enjoyed unlocking and trying every character to such a degree that I wanted to see each one inserted into every cutscene. By contrast, after a while of playing Dynasty Warriors Origins, I started skipping most of the cutscenes entirely. Despite Origins cutscenes all being different, the contrasting lack of interest I have in them is as stark as it is depressing. Dynasty Warriors, I was going to call it. Sod it. Dynasty Warriors is out and is a critical success, which, for a series that historically has never reviewed well in the West, is quite a significant feat. This did not surprise me. I had a copy of Origins over a month before its release. Hats off to Tecmo Koei for that level of confidence, and the more I played it, the more convinced I was that other reviewers, were going to love it. As I say, historically, Western game critics never much cared for Dynasty Warriors. I've been one of the series' very, very few advocates among professional writers. Pretty much the reviewer who did more than simply dismiss the series and instead appreciate the big dumb action it provided. Plus Yuan Shao, right? Yuan Shao set fire to his own supply depot. He confused his Guandus for his Guandon'ts. It would make perfect sense then that other reviewers would love a game that I find so antithetical to Dynasty Warriors. I don't blame them, especially because there is a lot to like about the game. When it comes to the series' wider fan base, however, I must confess I was taken aback at just how much of an outlier my 6.5 out of 10 review was. Not that I didn't expect plenty of appreciation for the game, but the universal nature of the acclaim and the fact Origins' flaws seemingly matter so little to everyone but me has been an eye-opener. Am I the only one who loved Dynasty Warriors for what it was? Am I the only one to whom its personality, roster, weaponry, tone, style, aesthetic, and shameless audacity actually mattered? Is the serious, straight-faced realism Omega Force has been preoccupied with for over a decade really what the fanbase wanted? And have I been a fan for the completely wrong reasons this entire time? Or is this merely the kind of brand loyalty I usually run into whenever my critique goes against the grain? Then again, it might just be that the fanbase is, so desperate for a good game to reinstill their love for the series, they'll accept anything even halfway decent to take the taste of Dynasty Warriors 9 out of their mouths. I mean, it's not the first time they've done that. They did it with Dynasty Warriors 9.
And don't forget it!
So, Dynasty Warriors 9. There's a funny thing about that game. It's worth noting that Origins isn't the first time I've been at loggerheads with the DW fanbase. While retrospective eyes look back on Dynasty Warriors 9 unfavourably, the game was actually pretty heavily defended at the time. A significant amount of the fanbase reacted quite strongly against my criticism, with me being seen as far too harsh, way off the deep end. After all, an open-world Dynasty Warriors game was ambitious. Never mind the fact there's no creative ambition in doing what every other game was doing at the time. Never mind the gutting of unique movesets and weapons in favour of clone after clone after clone was the direct opposite of ambitious. Never mind the hodgepodge copying and pasting of assets strewn about with little regard to environmental design. And never mind the fact that I was 100% correct when I predicted the cool unique weapons that had been cut would be held in reserve and sold back to us as DLC in a display of rampant cynicism. You could have a grappy hook! So everything was hunky-dory. This defensiveness never comes up anymore, and it's a form of revisionism I've become quite used to seeing over my long career. New game comes out, I criticise it, fans get mad at me, then a year or two later it becomes accepted that it wasn't really all that good, and nobody owns up to dogpiling the people who pointed it out first, aka me. How is Starfield treating everyone these days? I still see my old 100% objective review of Final Fantasy XIII brought up as a classic response to angry commenter logic, but the full context of that review has become somewhat forgotten, for it was written as a direct piss take of the zealous Final Fantasy fans who at the time had been harassing the jizz out of me for slating the game. I even had a light argument with a chatter on a stream the other day because they talked about how much everyone hated 13 when it came out, which simply isn't true. It was critically acclaimed, fans circled the wagons and declared it got really good after 30 hours of playing, and they attacked Dissent with furious zeal. The situation directly led to an untrue claim about me that's been taken as truth by many to the present day. The claim that I don't like RPGs that come from Japan. Final Fantasy IX is one of my favourite games. I was one of the most positive reviewers of Lost Odyssey. It was simply decided that I don't like the entire genre because that was easier to accept for people than the idea that I just didn't like their darling of a video game. There's no shortage of people these days saying Final Fantasy XIII was a bit shit. In fact, it's such a popular re-evaluation that it's starting to be re-evaluated with an increase of positive sentiment. But make no mistake, the idea Final Fantasy XIII was a letdown is a re-evaluation, not the original consensus. Also, a not quite related tangent, but it is genuinely interesting to have been around long enough that I'm seeing old games benefit from the Phantom Menace effect. That is, a new generation of pundits re-evaluating and often celebrating media that was popularly slated. Even though it sometimes means a bunch of kids calling me names online, the fresh takes are valuable in all but one case. Sorry, but I will not brook the attempts to rehabilitate tank controls. Don't make me do a whole ass video on it. I'm gonna do a whole ass video on it.
Which means I'll get to edit 2 videos about it.
Anyway, the Dynasty Warriors 9 thing. Perhaps it's self-indulgent of me to crow about that, but sod it, this whole video is self-indulgent navel-gazing. It does provide context, though, that I don't want lost as we look at Origins. Curiously enough, I was far less stunned by the defense of Dynasty Warriors 9, even though it's an objectively worse game. It felt every bit like that aforementioned knee-jerk brand loyalty that I fully expected to be retconned. As a point of irony, it's because Origins is fundamentally a good game that I'm more taken aback at how much of an outlier I am. For one thing, I can't deny this time around, much of the positivity is justifiably sincere. Dynasty Warriors Origins has a lot going for it. In fact, despite my criticisms, I'm actually fully sold on the concept it's flogging. Origins lays the groundwork for a genuinely spectacular Dynasty Warriors game. It has a very well designed and satisfying combat system, it's more polished and less cheaply produced than a lot of installments, and it's the first game in the whole genre to actually deliver on the promise of taking part in a war with tons and tons of enemies on screen. Its gameplay has many flaws, such as being so insistently focused on counterattack systems that other aspects of combat are outright trivialized. But you won't catch me saying it isn't an overall good time, hell, possibly even a great time. If you read my exquisitely written and objectively correct review, you'll find that I'm liberal with my praise. Its biggest battles are exhilarating in scale and intensity. The rhythmic sequence of parrying and countering enemy officers is responsive, intuitive, presented with satisfying audio-visual bombast, and impressively well telegraphed to players amidst so much on-screen chaos. Most of the time. In terms of mechanics and fundamental gameplay, I am in near total agreement with DW Origin's many adherents, and I want that noted because one of the great frustrations of being a controversial or polarizing video game reviewer is that in their efforts to accuse me of hyperbole and bias, many of the attacks on my work are so bloody hyperbolic in their biases and present anything written with a score below 8 out of 10 as hate-laden screeds, or as some self-reporting tools started claiming in recent years, for unknown reasons, my reviews are too emotional now. But no, quality game criticism should always be fair. Note that I said fair, not objective, and despite the reputation often conjured around my work, actually paying attention to the words of that work demonstrates much more nuance than that. And nuance is crucial to distinguishing the way in which myself and other DW fans are prioritizing different aspects of the series. So here's where I deviate from the pack. Yes, Origins is mechanically great. Yes, it can offer exciting battles and combat, but even at my most exhilarated, I felt disappointed because I kept thinking about how much more I'd enjoy it if I was actually playing a DW character instead of a generic amnesiac RPG protagonist man around whom the entire Three Kingdoms setting revolves like a poorly inserted fanfiction OC, which he is. He's essentially Mila Jovovich in every film Paul Anderson directs. Better than the source material's cast, better than everyone, and maybe that'd work if we could at least create our own character for the power fantasy of it all? No, though. This is Omega Force's precious OC Do Not Steal. The bestest boy, who it turns out was secretly instrumental in every iconic event in the setting, and actually did all the things every other character historically got credit for, and he saved all their lives, and everyone thinks he's so cool, and everyone is in love with him. Literally in love, because they all send him actual legitimate love letters and talk about him like a romantic interest. And while it would be cool if Dynasty Warriors Origins was really about how the Three Kingdoms was one gigantic queer polycule, I think the reality is that they just tried so hard to convince audiences their charisma void of a nameless wanderer was plop damned awesome. The metaphorical cocksucking became indistinguishable from a genuine desire to nosh him off. I've been stricken with the sudden desire to meet you. Even on my busiest days, it is your face that runs through my mind. Would you mind meeting me somewhere nearby? Just tell me where and I'll come running. If this game was being scored on homo-romantic subtext, it'd get 10 out of 10.
I want you to feel the same way. It's gotten cold. I'd like to warm myself up in your room tonight as well.
Oh, that one wasn't even subtle. Witnessing Omega Force push him as hard as they do is astounding because he's beyond boring. There's nothing to push. Mostly voiceless, barely capable of facial expressions, clad in a drab robe with no cosmetic customization, outside of another drab robe later on, the sheer gulf between how lovable we're told he is and what traits of lovability we're shown is multitudes of galaxies in size. The very few spoken lines he has could only be delivered with less energy if the voice actor was comatose. The enemy officer has been defeated, he unenthusiastically mumbles in a series once famous for boisterous declarations of officer defeats. But Mr. Jovovich here is just the admittedly pretty face of the game's entire problem. It has no personality. I call Dynasty Warriors Origins the best disappointment I've ever played. A game that hits all the right notes of a very dreary tune. While I said it lays the groundwork for a spectacular Dynasty Warriors game, this is not a Dynasty Warriors game to me at all. At least, not in spirit. Practically every single character has only slightly more personality than the protagonist, and that is only through virtue of them speaking more. They speak a lot, in fact. Origins has so many cutscenes, and vast quantities of them are mundane political discussions, and when I say political discussions, I don't mean politically charged. I mean they're talking mundane everyday politics. And when they're not exhaustively detailing who's the governor of where, they're exhaustively detailing the political manoeuvring and the strategizing that characters are going to be doing in the background, while you as the player will be up to stuff that has no real bearing on that whatsoever, and it doesn't matter. And why do you sometimes get multiple cutscenes in a row of this? Who thought that where Dynasty Warriors needed to draw its inspiration from next was Metal Gear Solid's codec conversations? To bring up the Star Wars prequels again, do you remember how the pacing of Phantom Menace got dragged down by these long-winded and inconsequential discussions about trade disputes? Omega Force didn't just put that type of thing in a hack-and-slash game. It dumped a dozen skips worth of that crap into a hack and slash. And at no point does anyone ever ask if the enemy camp was pretty. I won't even go into what they did to Zhang He this time. Actually, no, let me talk about that. Let me talk about what they did to everyone. There are no audacious costumes, no outstanding character traits, no eccentric or even energetic voice acting. Anyone who did have a distinct quirk has had it sanded off. My husband overheard me playing this game a lot and couldn't believe how much of the cast's motivations were some variation of loyalty to my lord. Well, when they're not being driven by an all-consuming desire to have Omega Force's OC Do Not Steal empty his balls inside them. And hey, I ain't blaming them, I'm right there with them. He is a pretty boy. I wouldn't mind draining him of his liquid silk. In fact, the one positive thing I will say about the character designs overall is that Dynasty Warriors Origins is stuffed full of handsome men. Lucky. Zhanghe, my precious boy, lost not only his iconic claws, but his entire everything. No more flamboyance, no more Toreador level beauty obsession. He does call one woman beautiful a few times as a concession, in a serious tone of course, because everybody is a serious soldier with a serious face and a serious voice, doing serious things seriously. I really can't do justice with words to how utterly dull everyone is. The only exceptions are Chengong, who at least retains a sliver of smugness, and Handong, whose persona has always been a paranoia that he's completely forgettable. Yes, the forgettable guy is the only one who stands out as memorable. It's like this game is reveling in its own mundanity. Celebration of the mundane extends to the interminable realism of Origin's setting, which, make no mistake, is at least partially a cover story the producers have trotted out multiple times over the years to justify cutting corners and gutting options. You get 9 weapons, all of which pertain to one of the 9 quote-unquote playable warriors you can temporarily get your hands on during some battles, but they're not actually playable characters. They are in fact nothing but temporary reskins, doing the exact same stuff you can do with a different character model. Of these weapons, 2 could be considered sort of exotic, 2 are swords, and 5 of them are polearms. Now these polearms do all have different mechanics, sort of. The pikes and staff are conceptually similar, as are the glaive and spear. No matter the differences, having 5 pole-oriented weapons just hammers home the pedestrianism. This series has had throwing axes, claws, feather fan lasers, flamethrower staves, fishing rods. I'm not saying swords and polearms can't be cool or fun. I think we need them so the wacky stuff doesn't get too overwhelming, but it's kinda hard for me to go from games where I can choose to be a pro wrestler armed with a boat to one where a literal nobody has been chosen for me, but I get to pick which stick he uses. Origins boasts thrilling high points and no small amount of fun gameplay, but those high points and fun are spread far apart between tiny repetitive skirmishes, a ton of grinding if you want to unlock stuff, an obscene number of long, boring cutscenes where men stand still around a table having basically the same conversation, and a vapid friendship system that I hesitate to call a system because it really just amounts to even more long, boring cutscenes. And it's joyless. That's the problem. It's oppressively, overwhelmingly joyless, devoid of any charm, po-faced and maudlin from beginning to end. And sorry, but that's just not Dynasty Warriors to me. None of that resembles the series I would rewatch the same cutscenes in so I could hear what Sima Yi says, followed by what Zhang Liao says, followed by what Pang Tong says. At least to the girl for whom that sort of thing matters, Dynasty Warriors Origins has none of the panache that made me adore this series in the first place. Also, personal note of outrage, I can't forgive Origins for what it did to the music used in the Battle of Hulao Gate. Much of Origin's soundtrack is made of reworked versions of tunes from previous games, and they use one of the best for Hulao, DW4's Wall of Fate. Except they cut out the best bit! The coolest part of the track is where it busts the bass out for a low swaggery riff. It's quite honestly one of the things I remember most about that otherwise tepid game. Oh, but Origins in its arrogant cruelty edged my ears for minutes before inflicting sonic cum denial. Will the crushing of my heart never end? Oh god, I just realised I wrote sonic cum denial. Don't Google that. And here's where we come to the "no, it's the children who are wrong" moment. Because nobody else seems to care. In fact, they seem genuinely pleased that the diverse eccentrics have been robbed of their eccentric diversity and harshly sidelined to fawn over a factory standard RPG amnesiac protagonist man. So, I wrote that above line about amnesiac protagonists the day before I wrote this bit here, and as I started work at the time of writing, I found this Game Rant article saying, Dynasty Warriors Origins offers a fresh take on the series, allowing players to step into the shoes of a nameless protagonist with amnesia. Fresh. I have read and reread this sentence to try and convince myself it wasn't written sarcastically. It was written last August as fluffy pre-release hype, but dang if my discovery of it wasn't well timed. It is interesting to see a legit belief that a game embracing literally the most overused protagonist trope in video games is a bold new take. It's like when people called Dynasty Warriors 9 ambitious, even though generic open worlds at that point in time weren't. There's something to be said there about the power of subverting expectation, that a series can look fresh and creative simply for not doing what it usually does, even if what it does instead is less creative. Thing is, nobody who loves this game with unequivocal positivity is wrong. I in no way wish to piss on anyone's banana bread here. The disparity between my view and everyone else's simply speaks to what people prioritize when it comes to appraising a video game. And I suspect for a significant majority of fans, the basic mechanical aspect really does beat all. Really is the only thing a game has to nail. Video games make for a fascinating medium, diverse not just in terms of genre or aesthetic, but in terms of how they even define themselves as video games in the first place. Consider for a moment, really consider, that God of War, Animal Crossing, Final Fantasy IX, Rock Band, Balatro, Wii Sports, The Walking Dead, Gran Turismo, and Dear Esther are all part of the same medium. It's phenomenal when you stop and appreciate it. A range of experiences so utterly apart from one another. I'm not sure even the most experimental films could replicate such an extremity of distinction, not while remaining films. You know, I like this video. I'm not even all the way sure there's a driving point to it anymore, but this has been a nice jaunt nonetheless. I should write while sleep deprived and hypermanic more often. I always found the debate over what is and isn't a video game rather gauche. Attempts to define the criteria inevitably fall apart and invariably disqualify games that not even those setting the criteria would have considered excluding. The worst definition I always saw was that a video game has to have a fail state. You just can't define a medium so versatile by a metric so myopic. A few weeks back, I published a review of the critically acclaimed and personally meaningful Mouthwashing. It's a narrative-driven game, consisting mostly of walking and talking, and if not for a small handful of puzzles, it would easily qualify as one of the walking simulators that so often found themselves in the centre of the gauche what's a real game debate. One response I got to the review was immensely telling. It said, "If stripped of sound, graphics and story, just judged on gameplay, I'd say it's a bad game." To this intriguing perspective, I said this: if you stripped any game of the majority of itself, you'd be left with a bad game. I wouldn't play Doom if I just hit-scanned little dots in a plain void. I wouldn't play Pokemon as a dull spreadsheet. I'd not play a single story-driven game that had no story. All games are a sum of parts. All games are a sum of parts. I'm impressed that I've circled all of this back around to having a point. The attitude expressed toward mouthwashing is not entirely uncommon. In fact, I reckon most who'd classify themselves as a gamer would place a premium on the gameplay, far away and above any other part of a sum, and that's their taste. But however important it is to the player, and however much importance the game itself places on it, a game cannot be stripped of everything but gameplay. At least it absolutely shouldn't be, because games are a sum of parts, and are inevitably lesser when parts are stripped away. Many people, however, see the most fundamental level of gameplay, what button do when button press, as the only aspect that matters. This attitude is what drives the old microtransaction excuse of, "It's just cosmetic." People treat cosmetics as something entirely separate from gameplay because it's not a command, a stat boost, something that affects what button do when button press. My answer has always been the same. Cosmetics are just as much a part of the game as anything else. Customizing a character enhances enjoyment and personal investment in a game by letting the player express themselves, stand out more, have fresh things to look at. While skins and hats have no direct influence on player actions, they nonetheless are a part of gameplay. Why else do you think publishers charge for the bloody things? They know damn well how much they satisfy the intellectual side of enjoying a game. Games are more than gameplay. In some instances, for some people, it may be the element they prioritise least. Some people play Elden Ring to be challenged, placing such a crucial importance on it being hard that they've denied themselves entire swathes of gameplay features to keep their idea of a pure game, the real way to play. Me? I've never played any game to have a hard time. Life's hard enough. Challenge on its own merit couldn't interest me one bit. I explore the lands between for the atmosphere more than anything else, for the scary bits and creepy bits and cool monsters and weird characters, but Elden Ring is challenging just as much as it is everything I like it for. One of these elements without the other isn't quite Elden Ring. You can't strip the parts and get the same sum. Unless you're like Rachel Riley or something. Deadly Premonitions gameplay is terrible, legendarily bad. At its best it's archaic, and at its worst it's a broken time-wasting mess. I famously gave it a 10 out of 10. It was one of the most hilarious train wrecks I ever saw, an unforgettable circus of what the fuckants. The experience transcended the gameplay, which ended up being a massively upstaged part of a sum that enthralled me like no other. Look, I replayed every cutscene of Dynasty Warriors 3 with a different character to see what they'd say. I wanted to hear how each delivered the classic officer defeated line. And I'm not saying gameplay doesn't matter here. I love Muso games and hack and slash in general for how immediately satisfying they are to play. I greatly enjoy that first time I take any character for a spin, try out their moveset, or at least I used to. Dynasty Warriors 9's abominable decimation of weapons and cloning of movesets ensured another part of the series' charm died for me. But that enjoyment I get out of trying new characters is still informed by the less mechanical aspects of the game, my caring about the characters themselves. Even if someone has a mega cool moveset, my enjoyment of them is negatively impacted if they have no charisma, so you can see why Origins let me down, right? Such is the nature of this medium that even a series popularly considered shallow, repetitive and dumb can have such dramatically different meanings between its fans, not just a sum of parts, but a sum in which those parts have no universal order of importance. As a professional critic, I've been an outlier on a notable number of occasions. I have of course had every predictable motive projected onto me for those reviews that go against the grain. I do it for clicks, I do it for attention, I do it for bias, I do it to troll, I did it for The Rock, etc. The truth is, however, far less controversial, because I like being agreed with, you know. They say Blue Sky's an echo chamber, I say that's one of its best features. I don't go against the grain out of premeditated self-service. I do it because I'm the girl who replayed every cutscene in Dynasty Warriors 3 with each character to hear what they'd say. I'm born different. Being a regular outlier isn't enjoyable, especially in cases like Dynasty Warriors Origins, where the mass embrace of it means I might never get my idea of a Dynasty Warriors ever again. Yes, Origins does some great things and has developed a spin on the Muso formula that oozes potential, but I can't ignore that Origins also completes the work DW9 started. It took the Dynasty Warriors out of Dynasty Warriors. This time quite literally. Unless you ask someone else, of course. They'll tell you this is the Dynasty Warriors that Dynasty Warriors should always have been. Huh. So here's a final thought. I had this while I was doing some of the voice recording. I have said that Dynasty Warriors Origins has a lot to love about it, and I said that the reason I scored it poorly is it didn't do the thing I wanted it to do. And one might be wondering, well, was it fair to review it professionally on the basis of it just not being the thing you wanted it to be? And maybe it wasn't. Or maybe the fact that a Dynasty Warriors game can disappoint someone who has loved the series and even forgave Dynasty Warriors 6 in many ways for over 20 years. And whether I liked the game more or not, those cutscenes are boring, and there's a lot of them. And the characters and the writing, it's just dry. It's drier than Margaret Thatcher's. The many little flaws that are in the combat. I mean, just read the review on thejimquisition.com. It's very well written. And I think the ultimate answer to the question, was it fair for me to review Dynasty Warriors Origins when it didn't align with my tastes as a fan? Yeah, it's fine. It's just a game, innit? Thank God for me.